20 years later, the truth behind Billy Bob Thornton and Angelina Jolie still feels like a locked door Hollywood never fully opened. Their love exploded in public, burned brighter than almost any romance of its era, and then vanished without a single fight captured on camera. No scandal-filled finale. No dramatic betrayal exposed. Just silence. For years, Billy hid behind jokes and dodged the real reason all collapsed. But time has a way of loosening secrets. And now, after decades of speculation, the quiet truth of what really ended one of Hollywood's wildest marriages has finally come to light. Long before Angelina Jolie ever stepped into his life, Billy Bob Thornton was already trapped in a cycle of emotional wreckage that followed him through adulthood. By the late 90s, he had been married 4 times, and each relationship ended with deeper scars than the last. His first marriage was to Melissa Lee Gatlin in the late 1970s, when he was still broke, unknown, and desperately chasing a future in Hollywood. They had a daughter, Amanda, but fame, instability, and immaturity pulled the family apart before it ever found balance. Billy later admitted he wasn't present the way a father should have been. That distance stayed with him for years, shaping how he viewed intimacy and responsibility. His second marriage to actress Toni Lawrence came during another unstable stretch. His career still hadn't taken off, and he lived in survival mode, writing all night, auditioning nonstop, sleeping wherever he could. Love never had room to breathe in that lifestyle. Then came Cinda Williams, a relationship born from creative chemistry rather than emotional safety. It burned hot and fast, and when it collapsed, both later admitted they rushed into something neither was ready to sustain. But the marriage that shook him the hardest came next. In 1993, Billy married former Playboy model Petra Dawn Cherniak. They had 2 sons and, from the outside, appeared stable. Inside the home, though, everything was unraveling. By 1997, their divorce turned bitter and public. Accusations flew. Billy denied wrongdoing, but the damage was already done. His reputation took a hit, his confidence shattered, and his belief in lasting marriage nearly disappeared. By the time the late 90s arrived, Billy had quietly decided he simply wasn't built for long-term love. He joked about hiding in hotels after every divorce, but beneath the humor lived deep anxiety, guilt, and a growing fear that every relationship in his life was destined to burn out. He had learned to expect endings. And then, when he least expected it, fate dropped someone into his path who would completely rewrite the script. And that collision would change everything overnight. In 1999, Billy Bob showed up to the set of Pushing 10, expecting another job, another paycheck, and another routine stretch of work. What he didn't expect was to meet the person who would flip his entire life upside down. Angelina arrived on set at just 24 years old, fearless, magnetic, already notorious for her intensity. Billy was 44, emotionally worn down by years of failed marriages and private self-doubt. On paper, they didn't make sense. In real life, the connection hit instantly. People who worked on the film later described the energy between them as electric. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't gradual. It was immediate and impossible to ignore. Conversations lingered longer than necessary. Looks held too much meaning. The atmosphere shifted whenever they were in the same space. Logic didn't slow it down. Timing didn't matter. And that's where the storm truly began, because Billy wasn't single. At the time, he was engaged to Laura Dern, a respected actress who believed she was building a future with him. While she was away filming, the bond between Billy and Angelina crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. What followed became one of the coldest relationship endings in Hollywood history. In May 2000, without warning, Billy married Angelina in Las Vegas. Laura found out the same way the rest of the world did. Through news headlines. No phone call. No goodbye. No explanation. She later revealed the shock hit, like a punch to the chest. One moment she believed she was engaged. The next, her fiancé was someone else's husband. Public backlash exploded immediately. Billy was painted as the villain, Angelina as the reckless disruptor. The internet, tabloids, and talk shows had a field day, but none of that mattered to them in the moment. They believed the connection was real, powerful, and worth destroying everything that came before it. What started as a spark had now become a wildfire, and the world was about to watch it burn in full view. But the marriage that followed would be even louder than the scandal itself. From the moment they said, "I do," their relationship stopped being private. It became a full-blown spectacle. Billy and Angelina weren't treated like a normal Hollywood couple. They were treated like a headline factory. Every appearance turned into a media event. Every movement invited speculation. And every display of affection became part of the narrative that they were out of control with passion. They clung to each other everywhere. Award shows, movie premieres, red carpets, interviews, whispers in public, hands always touching. They refused to be apart for more than a few hours at a time. Their connection wasn't soft or gentle. It was intense, almost consuming. Fans saw romance. Critics saw obsession. And the media capitalized on both. Then came the rumor that forever sealed their reputation as Hollywood's strangest couple, the infamous blood necklace story. In reality, it was never the dark ritual the tabloids painted it to be. It was a symbolic gesture, a tiny drop of blood placed inside lockets as a private sign of connection. But once the story leaked, it mutated instantly. Headlines claimed they wore vials of blood. Talk shows joked they were walking around with buckets of it. The truth vanished beneath spectacle. The age gap only intensified the scrutiny. 20 years separated them. She was young, rebellious, emotional, and rising fast. He was seasoned, fragile beneath his tough exterior, and already exhausted by fame. To the public, they looked mismatched. To each other, they felt understood. But hovering over everything was a shadow of how they started. The engagement that ended without a goodbye. The silence surrounding Laura's heartbreak never faded completely. Judgment followed their marriage into every room. Yet, instead of addressing it, they shut the world out. They built a bubble where only their connection mattered. Inside that bubble, though, something was slowly shifting. Two people with wildly different emotional survival systems were trying to build a shared life without confronting their deeper differences. The passion remained loud, but the pressure underneath it was growing quietly. And that pressure was about to expose the cracks no one outside was allowed to see. Because what looked unbreakable on the surface was already beginning to bend. From the outside, it looked like nothing could touch them. But inside their bubble, pressure was building from every direction. Once Bob Thornton and Angelina Jolie became husband and wife, the world didn't celebrate. It watched, judged, and waited for them to fall. Every move they made carried the weight of how their relationship began. The engagement that ended without a goodbye. The silence that followed. The unanswered questions. None of it faded into the past. The age gap fueled constant commentary. Headlines questioned motives. Talk shows dissected their psychology. Fans were divided between fascination and condemnation. The pressure wasn't just external. It seeped into the relationship itself. Angelina was fearless in the face of attention. She leaned into it. Billy did the opposite. The more the spotlight burned, the more he pulled inward. Holocaust-level scrutiny followed their public affection. What they believed was love became too much in the eyes of the media. Their closeness was labeled obsessive. Their chemistry was mocked. Their privacy evaporated. Every tender moment was transformed into performance without their consent. And still, they refused to explain themselves. No interviews to clear the air. No apologies to soften the narrative. They let silence do the talking. But silence has consequences. It hardens assumptions. It freezes public opinion. And eventually, it seeps into private spaces. Behind closed doors, their emotional rhythms were no longer lining up. Billy's anxiety worsened under constant exposure. Crowds drained him. Interviews exhausted him. Red carpets felt like emotional minefields. Angelina, meanwhile, was accelerating into global stardom. Her energy expanded outward while his defenses folded tighter inward. What once felt like intense devotion now felt like emotional imbalance. The world saw fireworks. They felt the weight of gravity pulling in opposite directions. And this quiet divide was only about to deepen. Because while one world was slowing down, the other was just beginning to explode. Angelina's life detonated into a new phase of fame almost overnight. Prestige roles, critical acclaim, global attention. Her name became unavoidable. Every year pulled her into bigger rooms, higher platforms, and more international conversation. Humanitarian missions soon followed. War zones, refugee camps, global causes. She wasn't just becoming a movie star anymore. She was becoming a global figure. Billy watched it happen from the sidelines of what was now their shared life. But as her world expanded outward, his felt like it was folding in on itself. He had always talked openly about his anxiety. Crowds overwhelmed him. Flying unsettled him. Endless public interaction left him depleted. Where Angelina thrived on motion, he found safety only in stillness. He later described it in brutally honest terms. Her lifestyle was global. His was agoraphobic. The two realities didn't clash loudly. They simply drifted apart quietly. Angelina moved with fearlessness into new challenges. Billy retreated into familiar routines: music, writing, isolation. The emotional support they once mirrored back to each other began to fracture. He started to feel like he no longer belonged in her rapidly evolving world. And that insecurity took root. It wasn't jealousy. It was displacement. He didn't resent her rise. He just didn't know where he fit inside it anymore. Watching her gather strength and purpose only highlighted the parts of himself he still felt broken. The distance wasn't born from betrayal. It was born from speed. One of them was sprinting toward the future. The other was trying to survive the present. And then came the moment that quietly redefined everything between them. Because one decision changed the entire emotional balance of their marriage almost overnight. In 2002, Angelina made a decision that reshaped the rest of her life forever. She adopted a young boy from Cambodia named Maddox. The moment she became a mother, something in her settled into absolute clarity. She was ready, spiritually, emotionally, instinctively. She stepped into that role with full certainty and zero hesitation. Billy was part of the early process. He traveled with her to Cambodia. He witnessed the beginning of that transformation firsthand. At first, support came naturally. Care did too. But after the adoption, the emotional shift hit him harder than he expected. Parenthood didn't frighten him, but the speed at which everything changed overwhelmed every fragile boundary he had built to protect his mental stability. For Angelina, Maddox brought purpose into perfect focus. For Billy, it magnified all of his doubts at once. She moved forward with certainty. He moved inward with confusion. Motherhood pulled her into a future she had long since was calling her. Responsibility energized her. Advocacy strengthened her. Family gave her direction. Meanwhile, Billy felt the emotional gravity of everything increasing all at once. Fame, fatherhood, global visibility, and the pressure becomes something he didn't feel equipped to be. They began to live in parallel, emotional worlds inside the same marriage. She grew outward into identity. He retreated inward into survival mode. It wasn't a fight. There were no screaming matches in the tabloids. No explosive betrayal. Just quiet emotional separation. By the end of that year, people began to notice they were rarely seen together. The disappearance wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. And when the divorce finalized in 2003, it almost felt like an afterthought to the public. But inside their private reality, the ending had already taken shape long before the papers were signed. And years later, the truth behind that quiet ending would finally be spoken. By the time 2003 arrived, the explosive passion that had defined Billy Bob Thornton and Angelina Jolie's early marriage had quieted into something almost imperceptible. There was no public blow-up, no scandalous scandal, no dramatic confrontation at a red carpet event. Their separation wasn't a headline-generating fight. It was subtle, almost invisible, but no less real. The love that had seemed unstoppable simply reached the end of its natural path. The world, accustomed to tabloid drama, didn't understand what happened. Rumors swirled. Age gap, whirlwind romance, blood necklaces, alleged betrayals. But those stories were smoke, not fire. The real reason was far simpler and far more human. Their lives, personalities, and emotional rhythms were incompatible. Angelina's world moved at a pace that Billy could never match. She was outward, fearless, and thriving under global attention. He was inward, cautious, and drawn to predictability. The divorce finalized quietly in May 2003. Friends and the public were left guessing, trying to reconstruct what went wrong. Yet in private, Billy remembered the moments of connection with warmth. There was no bitterness in his recollection, only acknowledgement that their love was genuine, but ultimately unsustainable. They had tried to merge two very different lives, and sometimes even the deepest feelings aren't enough to bridge incompatible worlds. In many ways, their silence preserved the dignity of their experience. They didn't allow gossip to define their story. And in that quiet space, Billy began to rebuild himself away from Hollywood's relentless scrutiny. Because even after love ends, life continues, and sometimes quietly is the best way to heal. Nearly 2 decades later, Billy finally spoke about the marriage and divorce with honesty that no tabloids could match. The answer he gave was deceptively simple. We just had different lifestyles. 5 words that unlocked the story in its entirety. There was no scandal, no betrayal, no secret feud. There was just a fundamental mismatch in how they lived and experienced the world. Angelina was designed for the spotlight, the adventure, and the global stage. She thrived on motion, risk, and growth. Billy, carrying trauma from past relationships and a lifetime of anxiety, sought safety, small spaces, and quiet routines. His retreat into stillness wasn't bitterness. It was self-preservation. For a man who had survived multiple heartbreaks, surviving quietly felt essential. Even after all the years, he spoke with respect and loyalty about Angelina. Their love had been real, passionate, and meaningful. The story of Billy Bob Thornton and Angelina Jolie is more than Hollywood gossip. It's a reminder that love can be real and still not last. Sometimes timing, personality, and life's paths define the outcome more than passion ever could. Their connection, though short-lived, left a permanent imprint on both of their lives. Billy found peace, stability, and a partner who matched his pace. Angelina expanded into a universe that demanded her energy and courage. Their worlds simply weren't meant to run side by side, but that doesn't erase the depth of what they shared. Now the question is yours. Could love have lasted if their timing had been different? Could two people built for different worlds ever find harmony? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if their story moved you, hit that like button. Because sometimes the quiet truths leave the loudest impact.